troublemakers. And that's been called to me a million times. We were trouble, and we were. And I set out to cause trouble. I mean, I have no apology to make. But I was trying to create trouble for the people who were denying us access to housing, to jobs, to adult universal suffrage.
The emergence of a self-conscious student class is reminiscent of the emergence of a self-conscious working class in the 19th century. That was a comment in the Times just over a year ago. At the time, it might have sounded wildly far-fetched. But does it now?
What is order? What is disorder? I would say there was disorder before. It's why there is no action.
When the students came down in the street, they have shown to the people that it was really possible to have an actual fight against a certain type of regime.
There was an appetite, there was something strong for more freedom, more liberty, for a more liberal society. General de Gaulle was a great man, but he had forgotten the social problems and the society problems. And social problems and society problems exploded at his face in '68.
I'm a socialist, I'm a revolutionary, I want to change the society.
One of the things that Danny Cohn-Bendit said about '68 is that street fighting leads struggle. And this was something which was really felt by the Northern Irish radicals, the Northern Irish 68ers. They acted very similarly to the famous 19th century French revolutionary Auguste Blanqui, who argued, why are we discussing what's on the other side of the river? Let's cross over and see.
Student activism in Paris, in the May riots in Paris, were hugely iconic for us. They told us as a generation that we had solidarity with the French students and that we realized that the numbers involved were really quite small, and yet they were pivotal in the changes that nearly brought about the downfall of the Gaullist government at the time.
A lot of what was happening in France was violent, and there was a kind of so we couldn't totally embrace what was happening in France, but what was happening showed what could be achieved.
You've got to remember that the times that were in it, as they say, that the demo in Paris and all the rest of it, Danny Cohn-Bendit, all of these people, the civil rights marches in America. Queen's previously having been politically, I think, a pretty passive place. And then you have this, upsurging of sort of spontaneous, sort of youthful protests. And that was a new phenomenon. And actually a very fateful one for O'Neill and the government of Northern Ireland.
It's unfortunate that Stormont did not realise that there was a wind of change, and it was blowing through America. It wasn't just blowing through Africa, it was also blowing through Europe, and it was blowing here.
We had come to the point where there were no houses being built in the Dungannon District Council area because it affected the voting pattern. And the overcrowding in the Catholic wards had therefore become absolutely untenable.
Houses were allocated in the village of Callerton. They were allocated, despite the fact that there were some people on the housing list who were in very, very bad conditions. They were not allocated on the basis of need. There were two families squatted, whom I supported, the Goodfellas and the McKennas. What brought things to a head was the fact that the house from which the McKennas were evicted, which was next door to the Goodfellas, that house was allocated to a 19-year-old girl who wasn't married. That was the scandal. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as I was concerned.
I have seen injustice. It has not been remedied. I will continue to fight until it is remedied. And if Captain O'Neill's speeches about community relations mean anything, then situations like this ought to be remedied, and I shouldn't have to take the type of action which I have taken today.
I relied on the television. And that night after the squatting, I had the satisfaction of watching an interview on BBC National, me being interviewed about something that had never been exposed outside Northern Ireland. So that was a very successful exercise.
They would have been blind and deaf not to be aware that pressure was growing on these issues, both internally within Northern Ireland and externally from the government in London. The question is, what could one do about it? It was all very well for O'Neill and, for instance, his finance minister, Kirk, to keep reminding people how very heavily dependent we were in London, that at the end of the day, we would have to do what London wanted us to do. But on the other hand, an awful lot of unreconstructed people who continued to see any concession to this as putting them on a slippery slope that was going to take them inexorably in a direction they didn't want to go.
I travelled to Mahara to a meeting of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association executive, and we put a proposal to them that there be a civil rights march between Coal Island and Dungannon, that we in the Dungannon area would organise the march, would provide the stewards. What we wanted from them was their banner and their umbrella.
We had been holding regular protests outside the City Hall for some months about the Vietnam War, but we now held a protest about the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And when we'd finished that, the Coal Island Dungannon march was in the early evening, so we drove down to the Dungannon, having quickly reversed our placards and put slogans relevant to that march on top of the rush out of Czechoslovakia slogans.
We actually made a banner for it, and we arrived and we were told, no banners and we don't want you here. And so clearly the Dungannon Civil Rights Association had no desire to have the young socialists around them.
My first real political lesson was the realisation when the march stopped that it had stopped because we were not allowed to go any further. And I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that the police were standing across the road saying we were not allowed to go into Dungannon Square.
500,000 troops invading Prague and the potential for World War III, at least in some people's eyes. This is headline news everywhere, and a relatively peaceful march in Dungannon doesn't feature anywhere. And Terence O'Neill is sitting in England on a Sunday morning, going through the Sunday Times page by page, and is delighted to find there's no mention of it. So there's no violent incidents, there's no story, there's no sympathy, there's no action taken by either Stormont or by the British government.